Good morning. This is Father Stephen Kelly from St. John's Church in Detroit. We're continuing our series of daily morning meditations where we generally look at one or another of the lessons that are assigned for morning or evening prayer, what is known as the daily office lectionary. And as we do occasionally, we're going to deviate from looking at one of the lessons because I want to talk about today's feast day. Today is the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. Now, if you remember, last week on Tuesday, we celebrated the feast of the confession of St. Peter. In other words, we heard about Peter, who, when Jesus asks who people say that he is, they come up with the various things they've heard, but it's Simon Peter who confesses the truth. You are the Christ, right? He knows that Jesus Christ is in fact the Messiah. And from that, of course, Peter receives his name, Peter, right? He says Simon is his birth name. And he says, you're the rock on which we'll build this church. Now, a week later, we're celebrating the conversion of St. Paul, another major important milestone in the life and the history of the church. Now, we remember, of course, that St. Paul was at first an enemy of the faith. We hear in the beginning of Acts of the Apostles, when the story of St. Stephen is being stoned, that one Saul, which is Paul's original name, Saul is in fact consenting to the death of Stephen, who preached the glory of God and talked about Jesus as the fulfillment of God's promise that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, and he was sitting at the right hand of God. For that, St. Stephen was stoned, and Saul was consenting to it. He kept an eye on everybody's jackets while they were hurling rocks at poor Stephen. And of course, God bless St. Stephen, he prayed for his persecutors, asked that God would not hold that sin against them. And so we hear that Saul then, at that point, gets permission to go and begin to persecute, to round up those who are following this way of Jesus Christ, to bring them back for persecution. But God has other plans for Saul. Rather than just stopping him in his tracks and ending the persecution, God decides that he will use Saul as his particular vehicle, his vessel, in order to bring the good news of God in Jesus Christ, not just to the Jews, but to also open it up to the Gentiles as well. And so we will hear, of course, our story at the Holy Communion service. We will hear recounted for us how he was struck down while he was on a horse. He was blinded, and that God had to get his attention in order for him to hear the good news of God in Jesus Christ and become a follower, a member of his body. So that's all very interesting news and very important for us, because even though, of course, Peter and others are going to also preach to the Gentiles, Paul is the one who really not only pushes for the Gentiles to be brought in with no differentiation from the Jews, the people of the original covenant, right? Paul says, since it's not about what we do, it's about what Jesus has done that we receive salvation, then we shouldn't have to make those who are Gentiles become Jews first, right? And the ways that's accomplished is through circumcision. So there's no reason, Paul says, for us to actually have this happen, to have the circumcisions happen, and the other things of the law, because we're not making good Jews. What we are doing is making fellow members of the body of Christ, and it becomes a stumbling block for the Gentiles, right? You're bringing them to Jesus. Why would you bring them to Jesus? Through Judaism. We need to know Judaism. We need to know the original covenant to understand God's plan, but you don't have to become a Jew first in order to be a Christian. This is also the last day of our week of prayer for Christian unity. And of course, we should be praying for the unity of the church 365 days a year. But the church has, for the past week, with special intention, been praying about the unity. It is a scandal that we are separated by our divisions, our differences. In fact, I remember that reading in Father Louis Tarsitano's book, An Outline of the Anglican Life, based on the Catechism, he talks about that the denominations are in fact caused by sin, human sin, right? Because we cannot follow the doctrines of Jesus Christ and live together in harmony. And it's a scandal to our being able to witness to the world about Jesus when we can't even agree among ourselves. But I have to say, for most people, once the week of prayer for Christian unity is over, then it's kind of like, whew, I'm glad that's over with. And as I mentioned on social media, every year for the week of prayer for Christian unity, I think of that old Tom Lehrer song. Remember, Tom Lehrer had all those funny songs that he wrote, and one was called National Brotherhood Week. And at the end of the song, he quips, "It's only for a week, so have no fear. Be grateful that it doesn't last all year. And I always get a chuckle out of that. And unfortunately, that's kind of how many of us in the church, if we don't feel outright about that, we certainly act that way. So may God help us to find that which is in common, and most importantly, to find that which is absolutely and utterly true about God in Jesus Christ, and help us to work together to proclaim it to a world so desperately in need of the gospel. So today is Tuesday. We've had a lot of snow recently. It does actually feel like winter in Michigan. We should come to expect that. But we will have our 12:15 Holy Communion service tomorrow. I hope you can join us in person. Today and tomorrow, and that you can join us in person for that, or here on the live stream. And may God bless you.